In recent years, we have had some of history's most epic entrepreneurial failures, stories of massive rises with even more massive falls, from Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos to Adam Neumann and WeWork. But few rival the story of Nikola Motors and the founder and former CEO, Trevor Milton. In this video, we're going to be diving deep into Nikola Motors. We're going to be talking about what this company did and why there is such a massive scam. And of course, we're also going to be breaking down what the founder and former CEO, Trevor Milton, did that could lead him to life in prison. Trevor Milton was born in 1982 in Layton, Utah. Milton dropped out of college after about one semester and was very early on in his career obsessed with fuel cell commercial vehicles. One of his first companies, D-Hybrid, was a company that outfitted semi-trucks with fuel cell systems. Ultimately, this business failed, but that then spun off into D-Hybrid Systems, which was a company that designed fueling systems for natural gas commercial trucks. This company was eventually sold to Worthington Industries, and that money from that sale was then used to start Nikola Motors, which was officially formed in 2014. Unlike Tesla, which had a major focus on bringing EVs to the mass market through sexy, fast, high-tech cars, Nikola had a much different approach, and they instead targeted semi-trucks. Though Tesla has in recent years shifted their focus to semi-trucks, it isn't where they got their start. But Nikola focused on commercial trucks from the very beginning. Now, it is important to note that at the time that Nikola was started, they were a hydrogen fuel cell trucking company, not a battery electric vehicle company. And there is a big difference here, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Though Nikola was founded in 2014, it wasn't until 2016 where Nikola really became a major figure to watch out for in the automotive world. And that was all started when they unveiled the Nikola One, a hydrogen fuel celled Class 8 semi-truck, which was a sleeper cab with 1,200 miles of range. After that announcement, Nikola received over 7,000 pre-orders for the Nikola One, totaling about $2.3 billion worth of pre-sales. The Nikola One was unveiled through a Tesla-like presentation on December 1st, 2016. At the time, the two main products that Nikola focused on was the Nikola Zero, which was an off-road vehicle, though this was scrapped a few years later. And they, of course, had the Nikola One, which was their semi-truck. Now, the real claim to fame for Nikola was really two things. Number one was their hydrogen fuel cell semi-trucks, and number two was their fueling network. I mentioned earlier that Nikola is a hydrogen fuel cell focused company. A traditional battery EV like a Tesla and a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle like a Nikola, they are very similar in what they accomplish, which is providing an alternative to traditional gas cars. But the way in which they accomplish this is actually quite a bit different. While a battery-powered EV like a Tesla is much cheaper to produce than a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle like a Nikola, they are quite a bit less efficient. For context, a fuel cell EV can get a full tank in under 5 minutes, while to do that exact same thing for a battery EV would take about 6 hours. That would of course depend on the type of charging that you're using, but very conservatively, to go for a full charge in an EV could take anywhere from a few hours to 6 hours, sometimes much longer. Hydrogen fuel cells are also much better for the environment compared to traditional EVs with a physical battery. But despite the fact that hydrogen fuel cell vehicles have a ton of upside, the reason why you don't really see them anywhere, at least in the United States, is because of the fact that there is basically a non-existent refueling network for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles in the United States. The only state that does have any sort of fueling network for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles is California, but even their network is quite small. It's hard to bring hydrogen fuel cell vehicles to the mass market if you don't have any way to fill up that car. So in order for Nikola to become a viable solution for commercial trucking, they not only had to come up with a truck that could efficiently run through hydrogen fuel cells, but they also had to create a network for those trucks to be refueled, which is what they did, supposedly. Now, full disclosure, I am not an engineer, and though I did do a lot of research for this video, I still don't fully understand how the process of creating hydrogen to fill a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle works. But what Nikola proposed to do was to create hydrogen fueling stations by creating a network that harvests and creates hydrogen that can then be used for their cars, or really any hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. This would be started by collecting solar energy at a Nikola solar farm. That energy would then be converted from electricity to hydrogen, which would then be stored in tanks. Think massive propane-style tanks. That would then be transported via truck to fuel stations just like gas gets transported to gas stations. This would then be used to fill up hydrogen fuel cell cars in a very similar fashion to how you fill up your car with gas today. With this proposal of a nationwide refueling network came really big promises, including an opening date of 2019, 364 different fueling stations throughout the United States and Canada, and the ability to travel 1 million miles for $0. When it comes to the actual truck itself, it featured a massive screen that could be used to map and plan their routes. Performance-wise, Nikola promised 1,000 horsepower, 2,000 pounds of torque, and 1,200 miles worth of range. As far as safety features go, there was better visibility as well as more stopping power, and let's face it, the truck looked extremely sharp. This presentation was the beginning of a massive rise for both Nikola as a company as well as Trevor Milton as a founder. This then sprung Nikola into the mainstream spotlight. After the presentation, Nikola received over 7,000 pre-orders for the Nikola 1, totaling $2.3 billion in pre-sales. It led to a provisional order for 800 Nikola 1 leases by Anheuser-Busch in 2018, and in 2019, Nikola announced the Nikola 2, another variation of the EV semi. In 2020, a mid-size electric pickup called the Badger was unveiled, and a month later, in March of 2020, Nikola went public through a SPAC. And finally, in September of 2020, Nikola and GM announced a partnership where GM took an 11% stake in Nikola, and in return, GM would use its manufacturing facilities to start production of the Badger. It is very important to point out that during this entire period of time, from the moment that the Nikola 1 was unveiled in December of 2016 to the moment that GM publicly announced a partnership with Nikola in September of 2020, not one truck was delivered to customers. Not a single one. And yet, despite these failed promises, Nikola had a stock price of just about $60 per share. They were valued at over $38 billion as a company. And if you thought that things started moving fast in 2020 for Nikola, just wait until you hear how fast things started crashing down. It's almost unbelievable when you start looking at the timeline of when things began falling apart for Nikola. GM announced a partnership with Nikola to produce the Badger on September 8, 2020, and just days later, it was announced that the SEC and the Department of Justice were launching investigations into fraud allegations against the company. Within days, Trevor Milton resigned from Nikola, and about 6 weeks later, in November, GM canceled plans to produce the Badger, killing the Badger as a whole. Nikola and Trevor Milton went from being on top of the world to being in a deep, deep hole and a ton of trouble in just about 6 weeks period of time. And though from the perspective of the public, it seemed as though this all came very, very quickly and out of nowhere. But in reality, this all stemmed from that 2016 presentation that we mentioned earlier. In the lead up of that December 1st, 2016 unveiling of the Nikola 1, Nikola had made a lot of claims in order to build up hype. On August 1st, 2016, they released a press release that stated, "Nikola has engineered the holy grail of the trucking industry. We are not aware of any zero-emission truck in the world that can haul 80,000 pounds, more than 1,000 miles, and do it without stopping. The Nikola 1 requires only 15 minutes of downtime before heading out for the next 1,000 miles. In this same release, they claimed that while traditional manufacturers have to partner with engineering firms, oil companies, suppliers just to produce one vehicle, Nikola had all of their development talent under one roof. But these claims were simply false. Nikola didn't have their entire team under one roof, they didn't have a fuel cell system worked out, they didn't have the ability to produce a semi-truck with 1,200 miles of range. In fact, Nikola didn't even have a functioning prototype at this point. Despite this, and despite the fact that Nikola had no functioning prototype and a ton of red flags were popping up left and right, Nikola and Trevor Milton still decided to move forward with the December 1st, 2016 presentation. Despite the fact that key executives within the Nikola organization, including the chief engineer, highly recommended that the presentation be delayed. If you watch the presentation, it looks impressive. The truck is gorgeous, and the presentation itself reminds me of something Elon Musk himself would have given earlier in his career. It comes off as polished, well presented, and most important of all, legitimate. But according to the federal investigation, the truck that is shown during that presentation is actually not functional at all. In fact, it had to be towed onto the stage, and the truck had to be plugged into a wall outlet the entire time in order to give the illusion that it was operational and turned on. The car was basically an empty shell, with no hydrogen gas storage tanks, with no gearbox, and many of the components that you would need to have a fully functioning truck weren't even designed yet. The sharp interior monitors were just third-party tablets and didn't actually serve any function at all. But the smoke and mirrors worked, and at the time, this was the only thing that mattered. But the smoke and mirrors didn't stop there. In fact, they only got worse. In 2017, Nikola released the Nikola 1 in motion video, which was the very first look of the semi-truck actually moving. The video shows the truck driving with the caption, "Behold, the Nikola 1 in motion, pre-production units to hit fleets in 2019 for testing." The Nikola hydrogen electric trucks will take on any semi-truck and outperform them in every category: weight, acceleration, stopping, safety, and features, all with 500 to 1,000-mile range. But in reality, they still at this point did not have a functioning prototype. In fact, the semi-truck that was featured in the video wasn't even operational. At the direction of Trevor Milton, Nikola took the unoperational Nikola 1 frame, towed it up a hill, and then rolled it down, giving the illusion that the car was driving. The video was filmed at a specific angle to make the ground look flat, and the video footage was then sped up to make it look faster. This was once again another example of the blatant fraudulent claims that Trevor Milton and Nikola took part in over the course of the last few years. One thing I do want to note is that Nikola did sue Tesla in 2018 for $2 billion for copyright and patent infringement, claiming that Tesla stole the design of the semi-truck windshield, side door, and fuselage. This was later dropped in 2022, most likely because it had no basis. This isn't really important to the overall story of Nikola, but I do believe it's worth mentioning. Now, in a way, I can see why Trevor Milton lied about the Nikola 1 initially. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not condoning it in any way, shape, or form, but I can see how these lies began. He was the founder and CEO of a big up-and-coming company. He was no doubt extremely optimistic, making promises that he probably at some point in time really believed that he could keep. But like so many stories exactly like this, the lies quickly become out of control, and eventually the founder and CEO ends up lying through their teeth day in and day out, digging themselves into a deeper and deeper hole that there is absolutely no hope in getting out of. Trevor Milton's story has so many similarities to the story of Elizabeth Holmes, who is the defunct founder and CEO of Theranos. And while I can see how these lies probably got started, like I mentioned, the lies simply got out of control. And by the end, Trevor Milton was lying about really ridiculous and unnecessary things. For example, in 2019, Trevor Milton claimed that Nikola had the only off-grid headquarters in the United States, with solar and hydrogen fuel cells powering the HQ. This was simply untrue. As I mentioned earlier, just 2 days after the GM partnership was officially announced, reports of fraud began to surface. The first report came from Hindenburg Research, which was an investment research firm which claimed that the entirety of Nikola was built on lies and false claims. The SEC and the Department of Justice launched investigations into Trevor Milton and Nikola, and in July of 2021, Trevor Milton was charged with 3 counts of criminal fraud and 2 counts of securities fraud. Trevor Milton's trial began this week as he faces up to 25 years in prison. Though, like most white-collar crimes, it is incredibly unlikely that he will get anything close to the 25-year mark. The trial is expected to last a month, and most experts agree that it is very likely he will be convicted. It's just a question of how much jail time he will actually receive. As far as Nikola goes, they are surprisingly still around today. It seems as though, at least for the time being though, they have abandoned their hydrogen fuel cell dreams and instead opted to lean into the more traditional battery EV route with the release of the Tre BEV. This is a day cab commercial truck that offers 350 miles of range and 645 horsepower. As of today, Nikola has delivered 48 units of the Tre BEV. Late last year, Nikola agreed to pay back $125 million for defrauding investors, and the company is still publicly traded, and their stock price is sitting at just over $5 per share. There are still plans to eventually produce a hydrogen fuel cell semi-truck, which as of now is estimated to be released in 2023 and 2024. but I am certainly not going to be holding my breath on that. I think most of us would agree that Trevor Milton is a liar and a scam artist that absolutely defrauded investors and misled the public as to what Nikola Motors was actually up to. And over the next few weeks, as his trial continues, I don't think the argument will be whether or not he lied. I think the argument will be, what are the intentions behind those lies? Did Trevor Milton mislead and lie to the public out of pure optimism and naiveness, or did he do it out of greed and malicious intent? Ultimately, it is going to be up to a jury to decide what the answer to that question is. But what we do know for sure is that over the last few years, Trevor Milton has been digging himself into a deeper and deeper hole of lies that ultimately led him into the federal courtroom that he's sitting in as I'm recording this video. But like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it. So make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.